Hello friend, welcome back in my YouTube channel. So today we are discuss about architecture of Spring Boot. So Spring Boot have a three layer, mainly three layer, and two sub layer, that is GTO and model. So main three layer is basically controller and service and repository. So we can deal with one by one. So first, client. So client is our front end part. So client send request through this all entire thing is basically backend part. Okay. So client send request to the controller, and we learned in our previous video. Inside the controller, we make our API endpoint. Okay. So in controller part, we make a API endpoint. Okay, and a controller basically controller send all these requests client requests to the DTO, and DTO is basically interact with the service layer. Okay, but controller also interact directly service layer. But when controller is basically interact directly service layer, then encapsulation is basically not here occur. But we know that Java is basically provide the more security than other programming language in backend side. Okay, so here DTO layer is working as the protection part. Okay, so controller layer is basically interact with the DTO, and DTO interact with the service layer. If service layer want to something by the controller, then service layer is not directly interact with the control service layer, basically not directly interact with the controller layer. Okay, service layer go to the DTO layer, and DTO provide all the functionality of the service layer, and controller, what is the client requirement is basically have a controller layer. Okay, and a control layer sent to the DTO, and DTO sent to the service layer. Inside the service layer, here we are write our own logic. Basically, when client want to something, then what we are give response according to the client. Okay, so that response is basically written inside the service layer. Okay, so service layer is basically two parts. First is the service interface, and the second is the service implement class. Service is basically our interface, and service implementation is basically a class. Service interface is basically interface. So here we write some method. Basically, that method is fulfill the user needs. User send some query, and regarding to that query, we write some response on the basis of a particular method. Okay, so that particular method is written inside the service interface, and this interface is basically only we write the method. Okay, and that method is basically that method definition is basically written inside that class. That class is basically service implementation class. Okay, so here we only declare our method. Okay, and inside the service implementation we write that definition of our method. Okay, so service layer is here completed, and and the service layer is basically interact with the model layer. Model layer is basically entity. Entity means let's take in some example that helpful to understand model. So when we are going to any website, that website want to user detail. Okay, so user detail may be name, email ID, and password. So that credential is written inside the model layer. So inside the model layer, we write some credential that is basically responsible to store inside the database. Okay, so whatever we want to store inside the database, that is particular written inside the model layer. So all about the model layer, whatever we write inside the model layer, that is basically going to the DB means the database. Okay, and the repository work is basically connected with the database. Okay, so that all about the architecture of our Spring Boot. Okay, let's go into the practical example. So here we first initializing our project. Okay, so going to the Spring Boot is Spring Boot initializer. Open to Spring Boot initializer. We going to the project Maven select, and language that is basically Java, and our group is basically com.example and demo not demo. Student management is student student management. Okay, so here okay, student management. Okay, student management, and project description. Inside the project description, student management Event project. Okay. And jar and inside the 12. Okay. 21. And here we have a dependency, z dependency. Okay. And generate our valid. Okay. So click generate. This takes some time and unzip, extract all, extract. Okay. So here our project and this is extract. Extract. Go to the window. Okay. So open our project. So here going to the open and inside the open go to the desktop section and here is student management. So this is student management our project basically. Yeah, so this is our project. Open this project. Okay. Uh, so it's loading. Basically, it takes some time. Totally depend on your internet speed. It's resolved to our dependencies. That is basically have web dependencies like embedded Tomcat server and other things that is basically here form.xml. So it takes some time and when it dependency resolve, here green signal is going off. So we can see that inside our dependencies we have two dependencies. First is Spring Boot web and second is the unit test. Okay, so that have two dependencies. Okay, so inside the src inside the java our basically package is com.example.student management. So whatever we write here code that code must inside the com.example.student management. So according to our spring boot architecture, so first we must create a folder that name is controller. So we are going to create a folder, package that is controller. So here write controller. Okay, and after that we create a DTO, that is basically data transfer object. So here we create a DTO package, DTO. Okay, so and the second is basically service. Yeah, so second is basically the service. Okay, so create our service package, service. Okay, service, and third is basically model, and third is not helper layer, is model. So model, and after that one last is basically repository package. So here repository. Okay, so our development basically started from left to right. Okay, so here one more thing I want to mention, that our development is basically going to left to right, sorry, right to left position. Okay, so our development will basically start a repository layer. Uh, um, first we make a project, first we write our repository layer, then model, then service. Inside the service implementation our interface, and after that DTO, and after that control. Okay, so going to our project and make a class inside the repository. Okay, so inside the repository, uh, you know uh, we have not knowledge about the database connection. So we use a collection framework to store our data. So here make a class. That class is basically name as a repository. Okay, so student repository, because of student management, student repository. Okay, so inside the student repository we make a collection framework, because of we don't know about the how to connect our project to the database. Okay, for storing our data we make a map, because of its take key and value pair. Okay, so our key is basically we want to give ID, and value is basically we want to give our DTO model layer, sorry, model, because of key is basically our ID, that is long type, and value is basically our model, that is basically model type. Okay, inside the model we make a class that is a student type, and student have some detail. Okay, so make a map map is basically it's take two parameters. First is basically data type, and second is basically what value of that particular data type. So here we have a ID, a student ID. So student ID is basically long type. Okay, so long, and value is basically our student class, that is make I will make it in model layer. Okay, so student. Okay, so student, and here map, and is equal to new has map, has map, sorry, map. Okay, has map, and I think we make here inside the model we make a class that is a student type, a student. Okay, So that class some property like a student have a name. So the name is must to string type. So string name. Okay. So and student have its roll number. So roll number is basically long type. So long roll number. Okay. So sorry, roll number. Okay. And a student have a must have a ID. So ID also long type. So here ID. Okay. The student have a email ID. Email ID is basically a string type. Email. Okay. So emails also emails. Yeah. So student is done. We want to create a getter setter. So first complete our repository. So student type is basically here import the class student and import map because of its take import utility package. Okay, so our repository basically completed, but we want to our ID is basically going to increase whenever a new user create our credential, send a request, it will generate ID. So ID is basically going to the automatic generation. So how it is possible? It's possible by making uh, a method that is basically generate ID manually. So let's make a method that is basically generate ID, unique ID. Okay, so int id is equal to 0. So first id must be 0, 1. So here make, sorry, here we make a method that is basically int I, and that method is returned the id. So generate id. Okay, so generate id, and its return id maybe start from 1. Okay, so yeah, it's completed. Generate, sorry, here we must see. Okay, so yeah, so our repository work is basically completed. Okay, so in student section we have completed our student also. So after that we are going to the service layer. Inside the service layer we also see that service layer must have two components. First is the service interface, and the second is the service imp, means implementation class. So make first a service interface. So here service interface, that is interface type. Okay, and inside it, and second is basically the service imp class, that is service IMPL implementation. Okay, so inside the service, inside the interface, we make some method. That method is basically fulfill the user requirement, means user query. Okay, so first we going to the our architecture of Spring Boot. Okay, so here we implementing interface. Okay, inside the interface, some method. Okay, that method is to fulfill the requirement of our clients. Okay, so method have some return type, and that return some value. Okay, so that value is going to the DTO class. Okay, so DTO class is basically DTO, sorry, DTO package. So inside the DTO package, that we returned some value from DTO to the service to the DTO layer. Okay, so here we make inside the service interface we make a method. Okay, and that method is basically return type is basically student response DTO, because of we send the response to the client. So student response DTO. Okay, so here we make a method. Okay, so that method is basically what is the working of that working is this method. So this method is basically what is the doing of this method. This method is basically adding the student. Okay, so add or registered student. Register student. Inside the register student, we have some request from the user. So that request is basically must have a student request DTO, request DTO. Okay, and student request DTO. Okay, so I think this is must be catalyst. Yeah. So a request and a response is basically sending from the controller layer to the DTO layer. So it's mandatory to make a class, a separate class inside the DTO layer. That class must be the student response DTO and student request DTO. So make here inside the DTO layer class that name must be the student DTO, student response DTO, and student request DTO. So here we make another class student student uh, request DTO. Okay, so that have a two method, but in Spring Boot we have two classes with the two special working. So so we must separate we must keep in separate package. So here a response
inside the response, we send a student response dto inside the response package. Okay, so refactor. And one more, another package is basically request. So request package, another package. Inside the request is student request dto. So effect. And yeah, so here our dto working is completed. So inside the request dto, student request here present. Okay, class present. Okay, so student have some name. Inside the student model we have some credential that must have a student. But student only enter the name, roll number, and email. ID is basically system generated. Okay, so student only request, sending request to that particular name, roll number, and email. Okay, but we send the response. Okay, and that response must have the ID, also ID. So here ID that have long type must send by the must send by the must send in form of response. Okay, so that is basically our DTO is basically completed. Okay, so DTO layer completed, student is also completed, and repository is also completed. But basically service layer is not completed because of we make a service. Okay, and that particular service it's not imported here class. So import first, and this is also imported here. I think R is must in small letter. Small letter. Okay. So it's not working. So I think norm is not matching here. So inside the request. Okay. So request student request detail student request request detail that have yeah, student request detail. Okay. So yeah, so it's working. Okay, so that interface it is interface, and that interface implement inside that class. So implements service. Okay, service. So service have one method that is registered student type, and that method must implement inside the service implement. Okay, so here implemented one method that is registered student. Click OK, and that is basically implement here. Okay, now, what is the return type of that particular registered student? So, registered student must have a return type of registered student response detail. And inside the student response detail, we have a long roll number and a string name, and long roll number. Sorry, long ID, name, roll number, email. Now, your student send the student request detail, and that particular student request detail is going to the our model layer. Okay, so model layer is basically interacted to the repository layer. Okay, so first we insert that student request detail into the model layer. So inserting that student request detail to the model layer, first we must create the getter and setter of our student class. Okay, so here click right, and after that going to the generate and getter setter, and select all and hit enter. Okay, so it's generate the getter setter of our student class, and inside the implementation, service implementation, we set the student request detail to the student class. Okay, so make a student object inside this class. So here we write student is equal to new student. Okay, new student. Okay, so we access now the we able to access all these instance variable that written inside the student class. Okay, so that's why we write here object of our student class. So the student, now student dot set id. So set id, that id must written inside the student repository. Okay, so we want to that particular id. Okay, so that's why we make here uh, we make that's why we make object of student repository, and that object is basically we not create that object is basically manually. So that's why we write a notation that is repository annotation. It's make the uh, uh, it's make the object of a student repository inside the IOC container. So extract that particular object inside the service implementation. Okay, so for extracting object, we covered in our previous video, we make a annotation that is auto add. Okay, and our class name is basically student that uh, we want to extract here. So student repository, sorry, student repository. Okay, a student repository. Yeah. So now we able to access all the component class method, all about that have written inside the student repository. Okay, so here is student repository uh, dot generate ID. That is basically method inside the student repository. Generate. Sorry, why we are not able to generate RD method call inside that class? So repository generate ID, basically integer type student repository. Hmm. uh why we are not able, and it must have public type now. Dot generate ID. Okay. Yeah, so student repository dot generate ID. Yeah, so generate ID. It's return the integer type and set inside the student. Why it's basically now long type and we provided int type. Okay, so inside the repository we must make this long type. Okay, so long, and also return type is basically long. So now it's basically sorry, yeah, long ID. Okay, so now it's basically going to ask. Okay, so it's now working. So same as a student dot email and name. So name is basically coming from the student request because of student send request, and that is request is here inside the request detail, and we want to access these properties. So for accessing these property we must create a setter and a getter to that. Okay, so generate, inside the generate we are going to the setter and getter, and press shift and uh, down key and generate all. Okay, so it's going to the generate all getter and setter. So inside the curly bracket, student sorry, student request radio dot, we want to the get name, get so what is the problem? Basically student response detail is not working here. Getter setter we make here inside the student response detail we make getter setter. So what is the get name is not coming here. Get name, sorry, first is set then get. Okay, so get is basically not working. Get name is working there. Get get name, where the get name. Here basically request. Okay, so student request detail must be request detail, and now it's going. Okay, yeah, it's work. Sorry, yeah. So now name, ID and student name is set. So student, now we set the email ID. Okay, student dot set email, and this email is basically received from the student request mail. Okay, so student dot set roll number, and inside the student dot set roll number student request detail, and now all the student is basically set student details set inside the student, and now we add that student particularly inside the repository section. So we must use this method and call the map method, and the map method, along to the map method we pass two value. First is basically ID and the second is student type, basically student type that we are basically completed inside the student. So now we save our data that we put inside the student, and so called student repository dot map. So map is not appear here. So map must be public type. So public. Okay. Now what is the dot map? Okay, map and map uh, map dot put. Inside the put we have two parameter. We need two parameter. First is ID. So sorry, so we first extract ID. So ID must be the long type, so long ID, and that particular ID generated by here. So copy this, and here we are also write ID, and ID is here. uh, Pass here ID, sorry, ID, and After that, one more parameter, that is student. Okay, so now our student, basically student detail is inserted into the map. Okay, and now we send the student response DTO to the client. Okay, so that we make a student response DTO object here. So make first student response DTO object. Student response DTO. Student response DTO is equal to new student response DTO. And now we set all one by one value into the student response DTO, and after that we return student response DTO. So first we set all value inside the student response DTO. So we write here student response DTO. Student response DTO dot set. Now the set is not working here. So inside the student response DTO, we are not making setter and getter that particular instance variable. So we make here first setter and getter to all the variable generate, and generate getter setter shift down key, and after that generate all the setter getter. Okay, now we are access set ID. Now we must send the our generated ID. So enter here ID, and student response DTO dot set name. Inside the set name, where we are get the name of our client. So after the first we insert the detail inside the map, and then extract all the value from the map. Okay, map is basically taking two parameters. First is ID, and the second is basically student type. Okay, so we want to extract all student details. So we must write here student type, student one is equal to, and for fetching the data from the map, we use sorry, repository dot map dot I think uh, get yeah. So get is uses here, get, and a particular ID is put it here. So ID is basically here we are enter during the saving that particular data. So ID is here. Now the particular ID have some data, and that data is basically stored inside the student. So first user registered, then fetch from the data. If a student is not registered, and you send data from the student data, so that is not a good way. So first student registered, so here we save data inside the database. Database is basically here we are using map, and after that fetching data from the map, because of our database is basically here map, so fetching data from the map, and then that data particularly sent to the client. So here we use student one dot get ID. So sorry, name, because of we want to set the name. So student dot response dot set name, after that roll number, and that roll number is basically student one dot get roll number. Yeah, so after that is student sorry, student response DTO dot set roll number email ID. Okay, so student one dot get email ID. Okay, now we can see here all these value that student response DTO must, so that is basically inserted to the student response DTO. So return student response DTO to that particular method. So here we return student response DTO, return student response DTO. Now what is problem here? Put method register student to the server, full method. So okay. So here we must request, yes, request video, and yeah. So now our error is removed. Okay. So we make the functionality of our registered student. So now our service layer working is completed. Repository is also completed. Model is also completed. Response DTO also completed. Request is also completed. Now the controller. So make here student controller class. Okay. So student controller. Okay. Inside the student controller. So first we make a REST controller. So at the rate REST controller, and second is request mapping. Request mapping, inside the request mapping we must send our endpoint of our URL, and now we uh, we want to access the implementation layer. Okay, so here we make a annotation that is basically a service layer, service annotation, service, sorry, service annotation, and that service IMPL is basically object is basically here auto add means extract a object of a service implementation because of we want to access that method, basically student register method. So we make a notation auto add, and we want to beam of our service implementation. So service IMPL service. Okay, and now we want to user input, so we write put mapping put mapping inside because of first we register a student, after that we get from database. Okay, so first we register a student, so that we use here put mapping. So here we make a method that method is basically return a response to the client. So that method must be the return type is basically student response detail. So right here is student response video. Okay, so student response video and register a student, and that have that must have that is basically taking some input from the user like username and other things. So we make a notation that take input from the user, so that is basically request body, request body in form of request body, and that is basically what is credential that we are taken from the user. So that is basically the all the credential like name, roll number, email, so that we make a user input type is basically student request detail. So student request detail. Okay, student request detail, and return to the student request detail, and return what is the return, basically return the student response detail type of return type. Okay, so that is basically written inside the service layer. So inside the service layer, service dot register student, inside the service dot pass to the student here student detail. Okay, now our project is basically completed. So run our project. So click here, enter, and what is the mm, inside the controller layer, endpoint is here, slash backslash. Okay, so and what is the credential that is taken from the user? So student request detail, inside the student request detail we must roll number, email, and name taken from the user. So after running our program, yeah, so completely it's working, and now we are going to here and make another like this, and our URL endpoint is basically slash one. Okay, and inside the body select raw and JSON format. Inside the JSON we write some JSON format like name name must be some name is basically like sub sam. Okay, and comma, after that roll number must be mm, maybe the roll number may be 220220, something like that. Okay, so sorry, comma, and inside email inside email we have sub sam at the rate 1 to 3. Okay, now hit the URL, and we can see that we have some result. So we can see here we only send the name, roll number, and email ID, but we can generate a ID. So we can see here we are generate ID manually. That is basically we are also looking to real life website, like we are going to register, and after that website is providing some password. Okay, and that password is just like the here we are say that ID. So ID is basically every student unique. Like when we are enter here something new, like new detail, like we want to enter here soup, what only soup, and roll number is nothing but anything that you want, and email ID is also it. And you can see here only one ID. Okay, and whenever we hit enter here, ID is basically two, must be two. Okay, so yeah, ID is basically must be two. So that all about we are covered inside the that all about covered today lecture. Okay, so in our previous lecture we make some other component, some other feature of our student management, like teacher, and also student other feature like create, read, update, just like CRUD operation inside this project. Okay, so thank you. Till then, keep learning and keep exploring. So please subscribe my channel. Okay, bye.